Hi everyone, how are you today? Today we are going to continue to learn about historical fiction, and it's not my voice behind a screen, but it's my face today because I want you to be able to see the chart that we're going to be working on. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my textbook. If you're wondering, why does she keep looking down and not at the screen? Today we're going to read a short story. It's a historical fiction story called Bury My Heart at Alcatraz. As we read our story today, I want us to be looking for clues to help us understand the setting of the story, the characters in our story, and the events that take place within the story. Remember when we learned about a historical fiction story, we learned that the characters sometimes can be true, but what the characters say, which is called the dialogue, that's always made up. The history or the event that takes place can also be true. And the writers of historical fiction will write these things so that way we can learn from those events of what's happened in our history. We also learned that in historical fiction, it can be told in first person point of view, which is words like I, me, my, or it can be told in third person point of view, which is words like they, us, we, themselves, he, she. So we want to be thinking which point of view was this story written as well. And normally there is a conflict that occurs within the story as well. And that conflict can be with oneself, it could be with other people, or it could be with nature. So if you have any background knowledge on Alcatraz, Alcatraz is located in California. And it is a prison that is on an island, and it's off of the coast of San Francisco in the San Francisco Bay. So it's in Northern California. This would be a picture of Alcatraz right here. And inmates would be shipped to Alcatraz, and the only way that you could get off of the island was by boat. So let's learn a little bit about the story. It's a historical fiction story called Bury My Heart at Alcatraz. Richard Oakes slipped into the choppy water of the San Francisco Bay. Richard was from the Mohawk tribe. He was joined by Jim Vaughn, a Cherokee, and 3 more men from other Native American tribes. They began swimming to Alcatraz Island. The men represented the newly formed group Indians of all tribes. On that chilly November morning in 1969, they were swimming for justice, which means they wanted to all be created equal. Richard felt calm. The government has made many promises to us, he thought, but the truth is that its treaties are never honored. It is time to take action. We are tired of lies. When they got to Alcatraz Island, the men claimed it in the name of all Indians. The Coast Guard took them off the island, but 11 days later, another group from Indians of all tribes took over the island. When they claimed the island, the Native Americans made a proclamation. The proclamation said, "It would be fitting and symbolic that ships from all over the world entering the Golden Gate would first see Indian land and thus be reminded of the true history of this nation. This tiny island would be a symbol of the great lands once ruled by free and noble Indians." So it didn't talk at all about the island of Alcatraz with prison inmates that were living on the island. So it had nothing to do with that. The story would have been written back in 1969. This is just a photo of an updated version of what it looks like today. All right, so let's try to think about the story and what we've read today. And let's just try to answer a few questions about my heart, bury my heart in Alcatraz. So I'm going to flip it over. Tomorrow we're going to be reading a story. Not tomorrow. Yesterday, we read a story called March to Freedom. Okay, and in March to Freedom yesterday, that was the story of the woman that was marching to with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it was told in the point of view. It was in the third person point of view. So we're going to try to compare and contrast between these two stories. In what point of view were they written? Okay, So, Bury My Heart in Alcatraz, that was also written in third person point of view. It used words like he, they. That tells me that that's third person point of view. Where was the setting of the story? Where did the story take place? If you can recall back from yesterday when we listened to March to Freedom, the story took place in Selma, Alabama. So it was in the South. Okay, Alabama. And if you can recall from today, Bury My Heart in Alcatraz, it was taking place in the waters of the San Francisco Bay. So I'm going to write that. And San Francisco Bay is in California. Waters of the San Fran. I'm going to call it San Fran just because I don't have a lot of room. Bay. Okay, who were the main characters within the story? So we want to remember as we compare and contrast between the two stories that we read, our main character from our first story was Amelia. Okay, and then our other main character in the story, it's tricky to remember who the names were, but they talked about two men, and those two men's names were Richard and Jim. So I'm going to write those out. Now, there is a problem in this story. Remember, with historical fiction, the problem is going to either be between problem of it's themselves, a problem with someone else, or a problem in nature. So one of the problems that we found in the story March to Freedom was that Amelia was on a freedom walk, and African Americans were not treated equally, and she was beaten, and some people were even killed by the gas and the beatings that the police did to them. So that was the problem in the story was that on a freedom walk, Amelia was beaten and she was gassed as well by the police. I think gassed is it is two words. I was right, by the police. What was the problem in this story for Bury My Heart at Alcatraz? Think back to that today. We just got done talking about that today. The Native Americans were seeking justice for those that had been taken from them years ago, and for everything that was taken from them, because we know that the Native Americans were the first people to live on this land, and they wanted everyone to remember that this was the land that was created by them and for them, and it was taken from them by the white people. And so the Native Americans were seeking justice. That was the problem in the story. The Native Americans, I'm just going to say NA, first space, were seeking justice. Okay, and then we're still comparing, and then what was the solution within the story? How did the Mrs. Griffey, the Amelia story end? Well, she survived, and she stood at the White House years later, and she watched as the president of that time signed the Voting Acts right into law. So Amelia, she survived, and again, she was a real person, so that was a true story. She survived and watched the president sign the Voting Rights Act, which means everybody has a right to vote. Whether you're a woman or a man, you're black, you're white, it doesn't matter what your nationality, what your gender is, you still have the right to vote. And then what was the solution for Bury My Heart at Alcatraz? The reason that Alcatraz Island, it became a symbol. It became a symbol for what Richard and Jim had hoped for, that they wanted it to be a symbol of justice. So it was, I'm going to write, became the symbol they had hoped for. So boys and girls, we have read 2 historical fictions over the past of the last 2 days, and we have learned that the characters within these stories were real, but the dialogue, the things that they said, probably were not. But we've learned about our history. We've learned about our past. So even though parts of the story are made up, the history parts are real. And now hopefully you've learned something about the Voting Rights Act, and you've also learned something about the reason that Alcatraz still has a meaning for the Native American people. So, with that, we compared and contrast these two historical fiction stories. We found similarities. We also found differences. We were able to figure out what our setting was, our point of view, our characters, our problem, and our solution. Remember that all historical fiction stories have certain features in common, and you can use your knowledge of these features to help you as you read. Thanks for joining me today for our mini lesson.